Morning all, and this is going to be the shortest meeting I've ever chaired. I'm really, first off, I have to make an apology. I'm really sorry. I haven't brought the bling in with me today. I mean, my precious. But I will hand it over without a fight to whoever is elected chair at the soonest possible opportunity. Honestly, I'm just waiting to get a copy made, that's all. I just wanted to say a few things. Being on the Fire Authority has been one of the greatest honours of my life. Serving for 8 years, 6 years chairing the Audit Committee. It was the first ever meeting I chaired. I turned up and I was a little bit stitched up by a previous member. When I asked who was chairing, they went, "Well, you are." So there you go. It was a baptism of fire, but I haven't looked back since. One other thing I'd like to say is that we travelled up to Birmingham to meet with FPOG and HMI, and we, as I think you've seen via email, achieved a fantastic result. It's not the end of the journey, obviously, but it's a really significant step on the way in that we have been removed from Engage. Our culture concern has been completely closed. We are still working on improvement, and I have no doubt and great optimism that things will continue as they are. Thanks for the memories, and I'll pass over to Zoe.
Thank you, Paul. So formally, just to open the meeting today, we are at Severn Park. It's the 1st of July. This is the annual general meeting of the Avon Fire Authority. I'm Zoe Coombs. I'm the Clerk and Monitoring Officer. So the first item of business on the agenda, and it's why it's me leading on this one, is the vote for chair of the authority. If I can just take a moment to say thank you very much to Paul for everything that he has done for the authority as our outgoing chair. You will be missed. Thank you. So moving on to who will be our new chair, we have had two nominations. We've had Tom Renard and we've had Dan Thomas put themselves forward. So thank you both for your willingness to step into potentially the role of chair. So before we move to the vote itself, just to confirm that under the Constitution, the way in which the authority votes is by way of a show of hands unless 3 or more members request a named vote. So can I just check first and foremost that everybody is happy to vote by way of a show of hands? Yep, nods around the room. Brilliant, fabulous. Probably should have done that one by a show of hands, really, but never mind. So, firstly, can I ask, please, for somebody in respect of Tom Renard to propose? Thank you. And second? Thank you. And for Dan Thomas, a proposer? Thank you. And a seconder? Oh, whoever. Okay, brilliant. Two seconders. It's doubly seconded. So, on that basis, then, show of hands will go for votes against, any abstentions, and votes for. So, firstly, then, if I can ask in respect of Tom Renard as being appointed as chair, any votes against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Any abstentions? And all votes in favour, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Thank you. And then for Dan Thomas, any votes against, please? 1, 2, 7, 8. Sorry, can I just ask for the pause to be raised a little bit higher in the air? I missed. So this is against for Dan. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, any abstentions? And votes in favour, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so I think on that basis, Tom, you are the new chair of Avon Fire Authority. Congratulations. Thank you, and commiserations, but thank you very much for putting yourself forward, Dan. It's very much appreciated. So, Paul, if I could ask Tom to come take a seat.
Bring your nameplate, Tom, as well. I don't want you getting me into trouble. Grab my water. Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Very much. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so the second item of business is the election of Vice Chair.
Cool. Right, so we'll now move on to the election of. We'll now move on to the election for the Vice Chair. Can I have? We've got two candidates because obviously I've been ruled out. First, do Councillor Paul May. Is there a proposer?
Yeah, I propose Councillor May.
Cool. And then seconder. No problem. And then Councillor Dan Thomas. Can I have a proposer? Cool. And a seconder. Thank you. We're doing it as votes against.
Yes, same way, please.
Okay. Firstly, for Councillor Paul May, can I take any votes against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you.
And then abstentions? Votes for?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
10, sorry.
10. Sorry. you.
And then for Councillor Dan Thomas, votes against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Abstentions? Votes for?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Cool. So, Councillor Paul. So, congratulations, Councillor Paul May. You're the elected Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everybody. I support all sides.
And thank you, Dan, again, for putting yourself forward. I know it takes a lot to do so.
So you've got an updated chair script, slightly change on the apologies for absence.
Right. So, apologies for absence. I believe we've got Councillor Erica Williams and Councillor Martin Williams.
Yes.
Okay.
We've not had apologies from Martin Williams.
Okay. No apologies received. Okay, that's fine. Right, item 4, move on to the emergency evacuation procedures. So I'm passing over to the CFO.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So we're not planning a drill today for evacuation procedures. So if the alarm does go off, then please follow me down the stairs out into the car park, and then we'll carry out a full roll call for the building. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 5, which is declarations of interest. CFO Matt Cook and members of the Service Leadership Board have declared an interest in the following papers. Item 13, which is the annual review of remuneration of the CFO and CE, and item 14, approval of the pay policy statement for 2026-27. Are there any other declarations of interest that aren't otherwise on forms? No? Okay, I'll move us on. Item number 6, public access. We haven't received a public access statement for today. So we'll move on to item 7, Chair's business. So welcome everyone to the annual general meeting. The Avon Fire Authority meeting is taking place at Severn Park. We're also recording the meeting for the public to view on the Fire Authority's YouTube channel. Can I now ask that members introduce themselves, and we'll go this way round.
Councillor Dan Thomas, North Somerset Council.
Councillor Annie Townsend, Bristol City Council.
Councillor Paul May, Vice Chair, and I represent Pensford and Whitchurch in Bath and North East Somerset. Thank you.
Councillor Raj Sood, representing Frenchy and Downland in South Gloucestershire Council.
Councillor Carol Johnson, representing Hallfield Ward in Bristol.
Councillor Jane Stansfield, representing Thornbury Ward in South Gloucestershire.
Councillor Ron Gartheni, representing Combe Down in Bath and North East Somerset.
Councillor Tim Kent, Hengrave and Whitchurch Park Ward, Bristol City Council.
Good morning. Robert Payne, Councillor for Weston-super-Mare Central, North Somerset Council.
Robin Moss, Westfield, Bath and North East Somerset Council.
Cam Haywood, Councillor for Knoll in Bristol.
Councillor Ron Hardy, Councillor representing Emerson's Green for South Gloucester Council.
Councillor Yasin Mahmood, Lawrence Hill and also Lord Mayor of Bristol.
Councillor Kim Cronley, North Somerset Council.
Councillor David Wilcox, representing Lockleys Ward in the fine city and county of Bristol.
Councillor Jonathan Hacker, Stockwood Ward, Bristol City Council.
Good morning, Councillor Matthew Riddle, representing the Severn Vale Ward in South Gloucestershire.
And Councillor Tom Ennard, representing Horfield Ward in Bristol City Council. And then we'll ask the officers to introduce themselves. Just to mix it up, I'll go this way this time. Keep you on your toes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Kirk, Chief Fire Officer for Avon Fire and Rescue Service.
Good morning, everybody. Luke Gazzard, Assistant Chief Fire Officer for Service Delivery.
Good morning, everyone. Amber Foreman, Director of Corporate Services.
Good morning, Emma Bowen, Democratic Services.
Alistair Mills, Head of Finance, Avon Fire and Rescue.
Good morning, I'm Verity Truscott, Statutory Finance Officer.
And good morning again, I'm Zoe Coombs, Clerk and Monitoring Officer.
So I'd also like to just welcome the new members of the Fire Authority as well, Councillors Johnson, Williams and Hooker, and also quickly just note our thanks to Councillors Goggin, Eddie and Murphy, who are returning to the Fire Authority this year for their huge amount of work they contributed over the last few years. I'd also like to take this opportunity to provide congratulations to Councillor Yasin Mohammed for becoming the new Lord Mayor of Bristol. You haven't got your building yet today.
So the usual heads up that I've just been given, and the intention is that I'll say this once at the annual general meeting and I'll only return to it if I feel a need to at future meetings. So this is just a reminder, please, as part of our commitment to inclusion and accessibility, please be mindful that I'm deaf and that there are others in the room who may also be deaf or hard of hearing. So whilst during meetings I will be using my Bluetooth Roger devices, which are strategically placed around the room now. They will assist as they are paired with my hearing aids via Bluetooth, but I do rely on lip reading as well. So where possible, please face me when you're talking. Please make sure that you're using your microphones and speak with a slightly raised volume without covering your mouth, please, if possible. So, and also speaking one at a time. So thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody supporting me as we move forward through this municipal year with that accessibility need.
Thank you. Really, really important. I'd like to now pass to Matt to update on the recent whole-time firefighter graduation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to report to Avon Fire Authority that we recently conducted a new set of firefighters to come into the fire and rescue service. So they completed a 14-week initial training, and I'm pleased to say that 15 whole-time firefighters started on that course and they finished and graduated together on that course. I had the honour and the privilege to attend the graduation ceremony and spend some time with our new firefighters and their families, celebrating what is a start of hopefully a long and successful career for each of those individuals. It's the first time we've recruited new firefighters into the service for a number of years, and it's really positive for the culture and for the vibrance of the service to bring new people into our organisation. So just something that is something to celebrate as a fire and rescue service. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm sure we can pass on the best wishes of the whole Fire Authority to those that have graduated recently. I'd also, on behalf of Avon Fire Authority and the Fire and Rescue Service, want to pass on our congratulations to firefighter Lee Ralph, who has received the British Empire Medal in recognition of his services to mental health, wellbeing and resilience. So a huge done to Lee for all the work he's doing in that space. It's having worked in mental health for many years before I became a councillor, it's really important that we continue to encourage people to be able to speak up, challenge stigma and discrimination, and make sure people can be themselves and feel well in themselves. Fire Performance and Oversight Group / HMI CFRS update. Over to Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Again, on Wednesday, the 24th of June, His Majesty's Inspectorate confirmed with me that Avon Fire and Rescue Service was coming out of enhanced monitoring after more than 2 years of being under special measures and special focus in terms of our improvement journey. This coincides with the release of our HMI CFRS inspection report, which is available on their website, and that came out last week, on Wednesday last week. And again, it demonstrates the significant work that we have done as a service to improve and to demonstrate to His Majesty's Inspectorate that we have stabilised the organisation and we're heading in the right direction in terms of our improvement. So obviously I joined Avon Fire and Rescue Service just over a year ago. In that period of time, we've closed 2 accelerated cause of concerns, one for mobilising, one for site-specific risk information. We've also closed a cause of concern for culture, and we've got 1 cause of concern that's still open, but to contextualise that, it's 1 recommendation which links to our prevention work, and we have a plan in place to increase resources in that area and to demonstrate our continuous improvement and our commitment to prevention work. So it does illustrate the significant work that's gone on across this fire and rescue service, and I could not be prouder of the officers from all parts of the service that have leaned into that improvement programme and demonstrated to His Majesty's Inspectorate that we are not complacent and that we have demonstrated those improvements, and as a result we have come out of enhanced monitoring. That is an important milestone for us as a service, but we are not complacent, and when we look at the recent inspection report, it does identify 6 recommended areas or 6 areas that requires improvement, 4 areas that are adequate, but it does demonstrate that we are absolutely heading in the right direction. I will also please just ask or just say a word of thanks to the Fire Authority for your scrutiny and your leadership and your support to me as Chief Fire Officer and to the officers of the Service Leadership Board. I welcome that scrutiny, I welcome that support and that leadership that's supported us and supported me over the last 12 months to really lean into that improvement programme. So what we will now do is we'll take on the feedback from His Majesty's Inspectorate, we'll build that into our continuous improvement plan, and our aim is to continuously improve as a service and aspire to be the best fire and rescue service that we can be to ensure that we are keeping people safe in their homes and in our communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'm sure firefighting members again would agree that we should pass on our congratulations, knowing that the job isn't done. There's absolutely still more to do, but it's been a whole team effort, and everyone's been working really hard to get us to this point and take us on a journey. So thank you to Matt and all of the senior leadership team and all the firefighters and everyone that's working to make things better. Back to you for Bristol Pride update as well.
Yes, so obviously news. Really something we've spoken about before at Fire Authority is our commitment to stand with all parts of our communities and particularly marginalised communities. Being part of Pride is a really important thing that we have done historically as a fire and rescue service, and we will continue to be involved in Pride and all Pride, so not just Bristol, all Pride events that go on across our service and across our service area. And we will be opening a Pride community event at Temple Fire Station on Saturday the 11th, and we welcome members, colleagues from across the service and members of our community to celebrate Pride. Our focus is around educational advice around fire safety, water safety. We're also focusing on recruitment from all parts of our organisation and particularly from underrepresented communities, so such as the LGBTQ+ community, and it's also an opportunity for us to create and strengthen our relationships with our communities and particularly the LGBTQ+ community, which we'll be celebrating on the 11th. I will also be attending, so I hope to see you there to celebrate community cohesion and what Pride represents, which is the spirit of Bristol and across the whole service in terms of representing difference and the strength of that difference as a community. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. It was brilliant here. I think also, just to make sure we're not too Bristol-centric, I think we're service were at Weston-super-Mare, weren't they, as well? Yeah. And we'll be at Clevedon Pride on the 25th of July. Brilliant. Right, I'll pass to the clerk now to do a couple of updates.
Thank you. So, a couple of reminders, please. The Register of Interest form and other forms that were emailed on the 2nd of June with instructions on how to be completed. Please can we ask that they be completed if you haven't already, and that you have a good look at that advice note that goes with the Register of Interest form, so that we can ensure that all the details that need to be on that form are there, because they will be published on the website, so we need to make sure that they are accurate. So please can I ask that those be completed. There are blank forms available today for anyone who wishes to do that. Just also please, before you leave, if you haven't already done so, Kimberly is at the back of the room. She's going to be taking headshots of you all as well to go onto the Fire Authority website, so that then we have updated photographs. And then also just a reminder about the ESS system, so how to claim expenses. We've had a number of inquiries on how to claim, to view your pay slips and obtain P60s. So information has been emailed to members previously, along with a welcome email from Capita, which contained login details. And if you've not yet set up your login, then please contact Emma, who will arrange for a further welcome email to be sent, and that will then be valid for 7 days. Please can I ask that any expenses be submitted within 3 months of the date that they were incurred. New members to the authority, if you haven't already received an email, you will receive one in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder to attendees, please use your microphones when you're speaking, and also remember also to turn them off, just so you're not picked up for saying anything perhaps you didn't want to be broadcast to the room. It's important that when speaking, to ensure all discussion is captured on the recording of the meeting that goes on the YouTube channel. Voting, as we've already done a couple of times today, required will take place by asking you all for a show of hands, and we will go any votes against, any abstentions, and then votes for. Right, item 8, minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 17th of March 2026. These are for approval. Is there any questions on the minutes? Okay, well, in which case I'll move that they should be approved. Can I have a seconder? Councillor May, thank you. Any votes against the approval? Any abstentions? All votes for? Marvellous. Those are approved. And then, I need to sign them.
Thank you.
Right. Very good. There you go.
Lovely. Thank you.
Right, item 9, committee minutes. So these are for scrutiny only, and these cover the minutes of the ordinary meeting of Policy and Resources Committee held on the 29th of January 2026, the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Extraordinary Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee meeting held on the 13th of February 2026, confidential minutes of the Internal Dispute Resolution Procedure meeting held on the 23rd of January 2026. There's no vote required, but are there any questions on any of them? No? Okay. We'll move on. Right, item 10, member appointments for the municipal year, and I'm going to pass over to the clerk.
Thank you. So this is page 41 in your papers, and this is a report that asks the authority to make member appointments required for the 26-27 municipal year. It also sets out the current membership at Appendix 1 and asks members to formally welcome the new councillors to the authority, Councillors Erica Williams, Carol Johnson and Jonathan Hucker. So the main appointment decision, it relates to the allocation of members to the Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee and the Policy and Resources Committee for 26-27. Now, under the Constitution, these committees should, as far as reasonably practicable, reflect political balance and spread across the constituent unitary authorities, AJOC requiring 9 members and PRC requiring 11 members. Essentially, given the way that the authority has voted in terms of the chair and vice chair appointments for the 26-27 year, Tom does sit or has sat previously on the PRC committee and Paul on AJOC, as both will now automatically move to chair at those meetings by virtue of the Constitution. So there are essentially two proposals that I would make as part of the paper to the authority. The first is that the new members to the authority simply replace the outgoing members on the committees that they previously served on, or because that doesn't, whilst that's simple, it doesn't quite achieve the political or unitary split that the Constitution would suggest that is required. That there is another option, but it may require a bit of shuffling around amongst the committees. So that proposal with the shuffling around would see as follows, as a suggestion, based on a unitary split and on a political party split, that AJOC would be chaired by Paul May of Baines, and then from Liberal Democrats, then from the Green Party would be Yassin Mohammed and David Wilcox, both of Bristol City Council. Then from the Conservative Party, Matthew Riddle of South Gloucestershire and Martin Williams of North Somerset. From the Liberal Democrats, Jane Stansfield, South Gloucestershire, and Tim Kent of Bristol. And then from the Labour Party, Kieran Cronley of North Somerset and Carol Johnson of Bristol. That would then see for PRC, Tom Renard, Labour, Bristol, chair that meeting. And then from the Green Party, Dan Thomas, North Somerset, Cam Hayward of Bristol, Annie Townsend of Bristol. And then from the Conservatives, Jonathan Hucker of Bristol, Erica Williams of South Gloucestershire. From the Liberal Democrats, Robert Payne of North Somerset, Raj Sood of South Gloucestershire, and Onkar Saini from Bath and North East Somerset. And then from the Labour Party, Councillors Ron Hardy of South Gloucester and Robin Moss from Bath and North East Somerset. That would be the slight shift if we were to move to reflect the political and unitary split equally. So I'll just put that one there for you for in a moment for when we take the vote. So that's just the point that I just wanted to make there on AJOC and PRC. So there is also a need for members to appoint 2 employer representatives to the local pensions board, and councillors Payne and Hardy have previously served in that role. They've completed the pensions training that's required, and they have kindly indicated that they are willing to continue in those roles if the authority determines that it's happy for them to do so. The authority is also then asked to appoint 1 representative to the Local Government Association. Historically, this has been the authority's chair. So, Tom, you may wish to move that one forward if in agreement by the authority. And then we also need a representative for the South West Councils and Employers panel. Now, Councillor Wilcox has previously served in this role. I've had a conversation with him, and whilst he says that he has very much enjoyed being in that role, it's not a role that he would be looking to continue on behalf of the authority for the 26-27 year, so a member would need to be appointed to take Councillor Wilcox's place in respect of that. So there are no financial implications beyond the approved members' allowances scheme and no identified risks. So in summary, please, the authority is asked to welcome the new members and approve appointments. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any volunteers to go on the South West Council's meeting and employers panel? Councillor Townsend? Yeah. Cool. Okay. And then just on which councillors go on which committees, there was 2 proposals that were circulated to group leads, which I assume have been discussed. Is there a preference in terms of which one we take forward? So either one that's about political balance or one that is just replace the 3 members onto the committees to replace those that have left.
Thank you. I'll be very happy to support the latter, just replacing the councillors that have left with the new ones.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other views? Okay. So if we deal with that item first, so we proposed that it's option 2 that was in the document that was circulated. Do I have a proposer for taking that option forward? Councillor Riddle. Seconder? Councillor May. Thank you. All votes against? Abstentions? All votes for? Marvellous. Can I take the next 3 in bulk? Are people happy with the employer representatives, local pension board, to be councillors Payne and Hardy, to appoint myself as his convention to the LGA, and then to appoint Councillor Townsend as the representative of the South West Council's meetings and employers panel? Happy to take them in bulk. Great. All those votes against? Abstentions? All those votes for? Marvellous. Great. All right. Then we'll move on to the next item, item 11, which is the annual governance and assurance statement and amendments to approval process. And I'll pass back to the clerk.
Thank you. So this is a paper for approval and has already been touched upon. Those who were at the AJOC meeting last Thursday or received the papers for that meeting will already have received an explanation why this paper has been brought to Fire Authority today. Essentially, the paper explains why it is necessary for the authority to amend its constitution to ensure compliance with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, better known as SIPFA, Delivering Good Governance in Local Government Framework of 2016. So the framework concerns how authorities review their governance arrangements and produce an annual governance statement. Now, an annual governance statement is required in accordance with the Accounts and Audit Regulations of 2015. And in accordance with the Fire and Rescue National Framework for England, Avon Fire Authority is also required to publish an annual statement of assurance. Now, since 24-25, the authority has published and produced an annual governance statement and annual statement of assurance by way of a combined report that's been called the Annual Governance and Assurance Statement. Hopefully, you're all still with me so far. So the approach in that way, it reduces duplication between those two statements. So currently, AJOC has delegated authority to approve the authority's annual governance and assurance statement. But in May 2025, SIPFA released the addendum to the 2016 framework, which clarifies that the annual governance statement should be reviewed and approved with by those charged with governance. So that means the full authority, as opposed to it being approved at committee level. So whilst that addendum specifically relates to the annual governance statement, not the annual statement of assurance, by virtue of the fact that this authority publishes a joint statement, that May addendum would require an amendment to the authority's constitution in relation to both types of statement. So to fully align with those SIPFA expectations, AJOC's role, I suggest, should be to continue to scrutinise and review the annual governance and assurance statement, which is good practice, but to recommend then to the full authority for approval that statement rather than approving it themselves by way of delegated authority. So it's recommended that following the scrutiny and review of that statement by AJOC, that currently happens in the December meeting of the committee, there would then be a short covering report which highlighted the key governance issues, and that would then be presented to the authority for approval. For this year, it would be proposed, as is touched upon in a future paper for this meeting, that would be at a meeting convened solely for this purpose, for approval, consideration and approval of that statement. That would be on the 13th of January, and that would then achieve compliance with the deadline of the 31st of January 2027. So to give effect to that revised process, the authority's constitution would need to be amended to change the role of AJOC from approval to review and recommendation, and then insert an approval provision for the full authority. So approval for amendments to the process and consequentially the Constitution would then provide for compliance with that SIPFA framework, and it would mitigate then any potential external audit challenge. So the authority is being asked to approve the amendment to the process and to reflect that in the Constitution. Happy to take any questions. Apologies, that was quite heavy.
All clear? Are there any questions or comments on this item? Okay, in which case we'll take the two recommendations that are in the report together, which is the Fire Authority is asked to approve the amendments to the approval process for the annual governance and assurance statement, so that Audit, Governance and Oversight Committee, AGOC, reviews the draft statement and recommends it to the Avon Fire Authority, and the final statement is formally approved by Avon Fire Authority no later than 31st January 2027, and B, approve the consequential amendments to the Avon Fire Authority Constitution. Could I take any proposers? Councillor Riddle. Seconders? Councillor May. All those votes against? Abstentions? Votes for? Marvellous, that's approved. Right, we'll move on to item 12, which is revised Fire Authority meeting dates 2026-27. This is back to Clark.
Thank you. Sorry, you're going to hear a lot from me this morning. So this is paper 12 at page 51 of your papers. So this report is asking the authority to approve the amended schedule of meetings for the 26-27 municipal year. The meeting dates were previously approved by this authority in February of this year. They have since been reviewed to avoid clashes with unitary authority, council and cabinet dates. And as new members have now joined the authority, the schedule is being brought back for approval. So there are essentially three proposed changes to note. The first is the Policy and Resources Committee to move from the 30th of July to the Wednesday the 29th of July of 2026 to accommodate the HMI CFRS observing that meeting. The second, that the Fire Authority meeting scheduled for Wednesday the 3rd of February 2027 would move to Tuesday the 9th of February. And then, as mentioned a moment ago, an additional authority meeting is proposed for Wednesday the 13th of January that would take place before the members' briefing that is already scheduled for that date, so that the full authority can review and approve the annual governance and assurance statement. So the proposed schedule has been developed to support effective governance, align with key financial and decision-making deadlines, and give members sufficient notice of diary commitments. Meetings will generally start at 10:30 with member briefings at 1 o'clock unless otherwise stated. The venues are expected to be the Police and Fire Headquarters in Portishead or Severn Park, so here today, where we are today in Avonmouth, although members are invited to suggest alternative venues, particularly where public transport links may be better. There are no financial implications from this paper, as venue costs will be met from existing budgets, and the schedule also supports compliance then with the standing orders, including the requirement for the authority to meet at least quarterly. So you're asked please to approve the proposed amended schedule of meetings for the municipal year 26-27. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from members? Okay, can I take a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Connolly. Seconder? Take Councillor Thomas just for a change. Thank you, Councillor Thomas. And then all votes against, abstentions, votes for. Marvellous. All right, that's approved. Back to you, Zoe, for item 13, approval of the pay policy statement 2026-27.
Thank you. So this is paper 13, page 55 of your papers. So members are asked please to approve the pay policy statement for 26-27, which is the appendix to the paper. Now, under the Localism Act of 2011, the authority is required to prepare, approve and publish an annual pay policy statement. That statement sets out the authority's approach to senior pay, the lowest paid employees and the relationship between these groups. The deadline for approval and publication is the 31st of March preceding the financial year to which the statement relies. The deadline, as set out in the paper, I'm afraid was inadvertently missed for 26-27, and I apologise for that. The omission has now been identified, however, and the statement is brought to this meeting for approval. The principal risks to the authority from late publication are statutory non-compliance and potential reputational impact. Late publication may attract criticism because the pay policy statements are intended to support transparency and accountability in senior pay. The recommended action, however, mitigates those risks by seeking approval of the statement at the meeting today, publishing the statement after approval, and strengthening arrangements to ensure future statements are brought within the required statutory timescales. I won't miss the deadline again. The authority's external auditors could potentially report the missed deadline as a governance weakness or as a failure to comply with statutory requirements. However, the corrective action should provide assurance that the issue has been identified, addressed, and is not expected to recur. The practical impact of the late approval is limited. Since the 31st of March, no senior pay decision has been taken by the authority. The 2026 pay awards have not yet been announced for Grey Book or Green Book staff, and the Gold Book award was announced on the 8th of June and is subject to the next paper on this agenda. Legislation allows for pay policy statements to be amended, and this is important because pay awards are often announced after the 31st of March deadline, meaning that amendments may be necessary even where a statement has been published within and approved on time. So that ability to amend indicates that a timing failure does not invalidate the authority's wider operations. Pay arrangements have continued and have not been adversely affected by the absence of the approved statements. Any adjustments to pay will arise from the relevant National Joint Council Pay Awards, the Grey, Green and Gold Book Awards. They don't arrive from the pay policy statement itself. That simply records and reflects those decisions. So the proposed statement for 2026-27 does not contain any substantive changes from the 25-26 statement and will, if approved and published, require updating once we know the Green, Gold and Green, Grey and formerly Gold Pay Book Awards. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moss.
Just checking, Zoe, do I need to declare an interest as a member of the LGA's Fire and Rescue Board, which has a legal responsibility, and I actually discussed yesterday in terms of green, grey and gold, because I think there's a potential conflict there. And yes, you're right, there was a discussion yesterday and there has been no final decision on any of those.
We'll note that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, so the recommendation is that the Avon Fire Authority is asked to approve the pay policy statement 2026-27 for the financial year beginning 1st of April 2026 for publication. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Connolly? Would you like a second?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Right, can I take all votes against? Any abstentions? And all those in favour? Thank you. That's approved. And then your last paper for a bit.
For me, for a minute.
Is the annual review of the remuneration of the Chief Fire Officer.
Thank you. So this is paper 14, page 67 of your papers. So this paper is asking the authority to note and approve the application of the 26th National Joint Council Gold Book Pay Award for Brigade Managers as it affects the Chief Fire Officer, Chief Executive and related senior officer salary arrangements. So the award was announced on the 8th of June 2026 for an uplift on salaries of 3.8% effective from today, 1st of July 2026. So whilst the Chief Fire Officer is employed under Gold Book terms and conditions, as are the Assistant Chief Fire Officers, the Director of Corporate Services and the Statutory Officers, so Verity and myself, we are paid as a percentage of the Chief Finance Officer's salary, Chief Fire Officer's salary, although we are engaged under the Green Book terms and conditions. So the Chief Fire Officer does not seek to engage the two-track approach. That means that there is no additional local pay award being requested. So whilst the pay award that was announced formally on the 8th of June at Appendix 1 to the paper confirms the 3.8% uplift, it does explain that the revised minimum annual rates of pay will be published by a circular in due course. Not yet seen that circular. Assuming, therefore, that the pay award will apply as per previous years, which are to bands that are reflective of the population covered by the Fire and Rescue Service, and the band into which this service will fall, will see that then the Chief Fire Officer's salary being inclusive of that 3.8% uplift, reflective of the minimum annual rate of pay for the bands that we are in. The proposed salary rates from the 1st of July are set out at paragraph 5.4 of the paper. There's no additional budget pressure identified, as the 3.8% uplift is included within the existing 26-27 budget allocation, and the updated National Joint Pay Award will be reflected in the pay policy statement once full details are confirmed. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Councillor Sood.
I will support this every single penny for our Chief Fire Officer because his work is visible. So I'll support that. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so the recommendations that the Avon Fire Authority is asked to note the National Joint Council NJC Gold Book Pay Award 2026 Appendix 1, which was announced on the 8th of June 2026. Approve the application of the NJC Pay Award as applicable for all Service Leadership Board members, and note that the Chief Fire Officer does not seek to engage a two-track approach, which allows for a local pay award. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Sood, and then a seconder. Councillor May. I'll take all votes against. Any abstentions? One. And then all votes for. Thank you. And now we'll move on to item 15, the revised 2026-27 budget and medium-term financial plan. We'll pass over to our Statutory Finance Officer to present.
Thank you. So this is paper 15 of your pack, starting on page 73. And this paper brings you an update for the current financial year budget, so 26-27 financial year. And the background to this paper just describes the history that we've gone through with that budget setting process. So the budget was initially set in February 2026, where a £5 increase in council tax precept was approved. We then brought back a revised budget to the March meeting because we'd had some additional information in terms of final national non-domestic rates, income, and we refined some of the pay assumptions. When we set that budget in March, we reported that the grants letter hadn't been received, and when I wrote this paper, it had still not been received, but since then we have received a grants letter. The grants letter confirms our USAR funding, so our urban search and rescue funding, at the same level as we've had previously, which was in line with the assumption we'd made when we set the budget. It also confirmed the pensions grant, but only up to 80% of it. So based on the 80% they've confirmed, that is in line with the full year assumption that we've made. So no changes again for that one. We also usually expect to see the protection uplift grant funding in that letter, and that was missed. I've asked a question and haven't had a response yet around why that's not in the letter. But based on the letter that we have received now, since this paper has been written, there are no changes to the income assumptions as a result. They're still in line with previous assumptions. So the budget that was set in March had a challenge of £795,000. So this paper brings to you today an update on that challenge and how we're going to bridge the gap to make sure that we balance the budget. And there are a couple of recommendations in this report. The first one is to approve an updated revenue budget position for 26-27, and then the second recommendation is to note some of the information and latest available information and assumptions that we've made in our latest view on budget setting. So if I move on to section 4 of the paper and the table at the top of page 75, this table gives you a walk of the from the £795,000 deficit within the approved March budget, and gives you kind of the moving parts there in terms of what we think might happen and allow us to balance the budget in 26-27. So the first one is a non-pay budget challenge. So as a service, we challenge our budget holders to reduce their budgets. We did do a similar exercise in the previous financial year and achieved quite a significant £600,000 reduction in non-pay costs. So this exercise was not expected to be so successful because of the significant cuts that we'd made in the previous year, but we did manage to reduce our non-pay budgets by £168,000 as a result of that exercise. So that took around 20% of the challenge away. The budget that's approved, that's put in this paper for reapproval today, just represents that reduction in non-pay costs and an equivalent reduction in the challenge. So the challenge that is presented in the budget for reapproval today in Appendix 1 is now reduced to £627,000. All of the other moving parts that I've put in this walk are not reflected in the budget for reapproval because they are still subject to change. So I will talk through those now, and the first two of those are to do with pay awards, which we have already mentioned this morning. So both green and grey book pay awards have not yet been approved. We have had offers, and the level of offers are within our... We set a budget of 3%, and we allowed a contingency within our pay budgets. If the offers are approved at the level, if they're awarded at the levels that they're offered, we will see some slight upsides against that contingency pot that we put in place, which is what's in that walk now. There is a risk that those offered levels will not be approved, and if that is the case, this could have there could be quite a different picture, because particularly the grey book pay award, because it's such a huge group of staff, quite a small sway in pay award percentage can have quite a big impact on the budget. So based on the information we have now, there could be a slight upside, but as I say, those pay awards are not confirmed yet. We also have an item in there around corporate staff cost opportunities, and I've explained in the paragraph at paragraph 5.7 just around some of the assumptions we made. The fact that we think we've got some opportunities there around some quite significant roles that had vacancies at the beginning of the year, so they generate some savings that contribute towards balancing the budget. We also have a few people that work on flexible working arrangements and have reduced hours, so they are not paid at a full-time salary, but we budget for them as if they are, in case they leave, in case those flexible working arrangements change. But that's a very prudent assumption, and the reality is that not all of them will be paid a full-time salary for this year. So we've kind of had a look at refining that assumption as well. I think there might be around £100,000 of saving within the corporate staff costs. And there's also an item of non-pay cost opportunities. So within non-pay costs, there's lots of moving parts. We have been looking at various elements of that. There are increases expected within non-pay costs, particularly around mileage rates. HMRC have announced an increase in mileage rates recently, so we're expecting some of our expenses to increase as a result. We've also got to consider things like fuel cost increases, but there are some other offsetting areas that we're exploring. We're at the moment expecting about a £20,000 additional non-pay opportunity there. Quite a big number in our revenue budget as we move forward is borrowing costs because of our significant capital programme. We have managed to delay borrowing. We had some additional capital funding from MHCLG, which helped contribute to some of the capital investment in 25-26 and allowed us to delay the borrowing, which meant that when we move into 26-27, we still have the same level as borrowing as we previously had. And the original budget was set on the assumption that some new borrowing would have been taken out in 25-26 and would have increased some of the costs from the beginning of the year. We've not seen that happen, so there are some savings. Offsetting that, though, are movements in current interest rates. So the interest rates at the moment are looking just over 5%. We budgeted for 4.6, so they are higher than the budget level we set. We do get a 0.2% reduction on that because of having certain arrangements in place with the Public Works Loan Board. So we should be able to achieve an under 5% borrowing rate based on the rates at the moment, but still higher than our budgeted rate. But the fact that we've been able to push that borrowing to the right means that overall I think there will be a slight saving. But that all depends on how things move throughout the year. So we're keeping an eye on cash flow and just seeing if we can utilise our internal cash flows as much as possible. We've also got a little bit of capital reserve, about 1.5 million still that we didn't use in 25-26. We'll use that first. We'll utilise any remaining MHCLG money before we go on to borrowing. Another item on the walk is some additional funding from WECA. Now, there's a little correction for the minutes. The acronym LRAP, it should say Local Remediation Acceleration Plan, not Action Plan. So correction for the minutes there. But there's some additional funding that we are expecting to receive over the next 2 years to deliver that programme of work. The final agreement hasn't yet been signed, but it's looking highly likely that it will be, and we are planning to deliver the majority of that work with existing resource, so it means that any funding or the majority of the funding that we receive for that is likely to have a positive impact on our bottom line and help us balance the budget. So whilst that's not signed off yet, that's looking highly likely. And then we've just got another pot at the bottom, so another £20,000 of savings required to balance the budget. So all in all, there's still a challenge. It's still a challenging position there. It's still a lot of work to do to make sure we balance that budget, and there are still some big uncertainties, which is why I haven't presented the budget with all of those items for approval, because I think that they're highly likely still to change. Moving on then to the medium-term financial plan, which I just touched on at the bottom of page 78 and on to page 79. There are still challenges within the medium-term financial plan. Some of the things we've seen in that walk could have a beneficial impact on future years. For example, if the pay awards are agreed at slightly lower rates, because of the way the MTFP works, it builds on the previous year's assumptions. So if we make a slight saving in the first year, it will mean that the second year, third year, fourth year are slightly cheaper as well. So there are hopefully some impacts of the 26-27 year that will help to reduce those challenges, but we still do have challenges, particularly in that second year. We're looking at over 1.1 million of challenge. So it's just really to highlight that we have a challenge still with balancing this year's budget, and we can't lose sight of the fact that the future years are still challenging. So just to kind of recap, the budget that is presented on page 81 is the revised budget that we're presenting for approval today. It just reflects the non-pay budget challenge, which non-pay budget holders have accepted, and reflects a revised £627,000 challenge, of which we can see there is a route path at the moment, but still some uncertainties. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Verity. I'll come to Councillor Hooker first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Verity, for your presentation. Just a question for my own understanding, really. I can see that in the table, Appendix 1, the budget challenge, the original budget challenge of 795k, that is shown against investment fund. And then there's a further transfer from reserves of 805k to balance the budget. Could you just explain a bit about the transfer from reserves of 805k, because that's obviously in addition to the challenge that has already been identified, part of which has been mitigated by the 168,000 that is shown in the table. But could you just explain a bit about that, please?
No problem. So the first point is, I noticed that as I was presenting, the investment fund is a really confusing description of the challenge line, and I think we'll change that in future because that's not really what it is. But the transfer from reserves line, there are two main elements that we are using reserves to balance the 26-27 budget. The first is towards the implementation costs for the mobilising project. So there's a project going on where we are bringing in a new mobilising system within our control room. That project has quite significant implementation costs. So in previous years, we were able to put aside some money to help us mitigate those one-off, and they go across a couple of years. So we used some in 25-26, and we'll use the rest of it this year to mitigate some of those implementation costs, which are over and above the normal kind of business as usual annual running costs. So part of it is that. And the other part is to do with business fire safety. So we receive specific protection uplift grant funding. In the past, we have received more than we've spent, so it's held in a reserve, so it's restricted for that use only. And now, generally speaking, we receive about it's just over £300,000 of funding, but we spend a little bit more than that, so we release the reserve to offset that to hold our revenue budget neutral. That reserve will run out in the next few years, depending on how much funding we continue to receive. But that's not assumed to continue into the following financial year, for example. So we're not assuming those releases happen again and again. If we looked across the medium-term financial plan, the reserve utilisation is assumed to be zero over the 3 following years. So I absolutely appreciate that using those reserves is helping us balance the budget this year. They are for specific things and they're not assumed to recur.
Thank you, Verity. That's very helpful. And I have to admit that when I saw the 795k allocated against a line called investment fund, I was slightly confused by that.
Change that. I'm not sure why it's called that. It's a bit of an oversight there.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to Councillor Moss and then Councillor Kent.
Thank you very much, Verity, for the report in challenging circumstances. I think it's probably worth highlighting that there are a couple of issues potentially within the year. I think the first ones clearly are Gold Book has been agreed. Grey Book is likely to be agreed. Green Book, however, I think it's the three trade unions have all said have said they're balloting, I think, and consulting on the 3.3, so that potentially could go up. But there's a couple of other issues as well in there. I think there's the borrowing cost reductions. I mean, interest rates, it's slightly out of our control. Interest rates will be interest rates. But also got a question about the major capital rebuild programme that we know the costs of that are rising higher than we hoped or expected, and I wonder if that is being taken account of in the in the calculations. I think also as well, for information with the medium-term financial plan, a big element of the MTFP, of course, is the central government's view of what the grant should be, and also central government's view of what precept controls should be. Those precept controls are obviously, or limits are differ from whether or not you have a combined authority mayor or you don't. That is creating quite a complex situation nationally, and I know that the LGA nationally, who will represent the government on behalf of fire authorities, are concerned about capacity, just simply because of the complexity, and there has been a request, I don't want to give you some extra work, a request for Section 151 and finance officers from local fire authorities actually provide some national assistance and some national assistance in that. So I'll pass on the contact details, whether you pick that up or not, but clearly that is going to make a very big difference, particularly with what looks like to be an increase in the national devolution agenda and finance agenda over the next few years. But apart from that, it's an easy job, isn't it, Verity?
I mean, you're right. There's a lot going on. To address your point around rising costs of capital programmes and rebuilds, they are built into this in the sense that we had an increase in overall project spend, but we were lucky enough to have also some additional funding, which we were lucky enough that they offset each other. So that held the programme neutral from that perspective. But you're absolutely right. In terms of the funding position, whilst we had a 3-year settlement, there's still a lot going on that could mean that our funding position changes. So we had a 3-year funding settlement for this current year and the 2 future years. I have been involved in some national conversations around conversations around the fire funding formula. So in the last financial year, they updated the data within that formula to make it more current. What they're now looking at is that formula really weighting relative needs appropriately? So it quite heavily weights on population at the moment. Is that right? There are some services that feel that deprivation should be more prominent, and they have kind of not done so well out of that formula review. So after this 3-year settlement, there's likely to be another change in the way that revenue support grant funding works, along with, as you say, kind of mayoral conversations. What does that mean for precept? And actually, what does that even mean for kind of access to capital funding as well, which we don't have? So it's a difficult, whilst we thought we had some certainty in terms of 3 years, there's still a lot of other change going on that could impact us over those few years.
Councillor Kent. Thank you. Thank you for your report. That's a really good accounting to try to close that gap. I just wanted to ask about the income from investments. So I sort of see a projected figure of £175,000. I do note, though, that last year our income appeared to be higher than what we projected. I think we were projecting 215, but we actually achieved 365,000. But is that going down because we have less cash, so we have less income? And is there a chance that figure could be looked at again and that might give us a little bit more wriggle room throughout the year. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we reduced that on the basis that we thought we would have less cash and that interest rates were dropping. That was the kind of general trend. Then interest rates increased. And actually our cash balance didn't look quite so bad as we thought because we had some additional funding because the Bath rebuild was slower. So yes, absolutely. If those interest rates remain higher, and for I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know for the beginning of this year, so for the first 3 months, we have seen higher interest rates than we thought. So we could well track above that 175,000. So that's another one that we'll keep an eye on because it could well be an area that will help us bridge that gap.
Councillor May.
Thank you, Chair. A really, really good report. I remember when the Chief Fire Officer first joined us, we were in dire financial situation, and I think in view of the fact that the report at the start of the meeting around HMI and this, it strikes me that we're not actually intending to cut any frontline services. So for the record, can we just be very clear that that is the case that I'm seeing here in front of me, because I think it is important that we actually do support our frontline workers, and I know that then seems unfair to non-pay or the non-budgeted non-pay budgets, but it is important, I think, that we recognise that the frontline service is really important to what we're doing. So I think I'm addressing the question to you, but it's probably more for Matt to reply, if you don't mind, because I think it's important that we get that message over to our colleagues.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Absolutely, when I first stepped into the role, we were facing significant challenges and we were looking at all options on the table. We've lobbied extensively for additional investment into this fire and rescue service. As a result of that, our revenue support grant was reviewed and increased significantly. We've also had additional capital investment in the fire and rescue service, which supports the Bath project, for example, from MHCLG. As you see within the papers today, it's still a difficult and challenging position. So as Chief Fire Officer, I can never rule out having to look at difficult decisions because that's the nature of the job. What we must do is ensure we provide a service that protects the public and keeps people safe, and we do that through prevention, protection and response. Everything that sits behind that target operating model is an enabling service. So there isn't a single part of this organisation that doesn't add and contribute to that ability for us to provide public safety, whether it's responding in a fire engine in a really quick way to, carry out an intervention in someone's worst, often their worst day of their lives, or educating people through prevention, or making sure the built environment is safe. So everybody contributes to public safety, both frontline and enabling service. So you see within the report today that we've made decisions to try and reduce our costs, and that will have an impact, across our training teams, across, our fleet services. What I would ask for is more sustainable investment in our fire and rescue service. One of the biggest restrictions is the precept cap. So the ability for us to be able to, bring in additional revenue income through a conversation and dialogue with our communities. And you saw last year we went out and consulted through our CRMP. We spoke about £5, but we also spoke about £10. And actually the results back was people willing to spend more on their fire and rescue service. But the ability to go above the £5 precept would trigger a referendum, and obviously the cost of that is a significant risk to the fire authority, so we haven't put that forward as a proposal. So what I would continue to seek in my capacity as Chief Fire Officer through the National Fire Chief Council is to look at fire authorities and look at the precept cap and how restrictive that is for us to have a dialogue locally with our communities and potentially go above the £5. We are also restricted by our capital borrowing costs, and you'll see within the medium-term financial plan that next year we see that increase again, and that is again an impact. I want to provide a safe environment for firefighters. We want to invest in our community fire stations, and Bath is a really good example of that. Weston-super-Mare is another example where we've got an ageing critical infrastructure, buildings. We want to make sure they are good community assets, they're modern, they're safe for firefighters, but we're restricted by our ability to borrow and the impact that has to our medium-term financial plan. So it is a difficult operating environment financially, and I've got a good team around me, and we'll make sure that any decisions are fully impact assessed and that they come to the authority for scrutiny.
Chair, I think that that's a very, very full, correct response from the Chief Fire Officer. I was just trying to make, I was going to say almost the political point, that we're in a much better position than we were even 12 months ago. And with the report from HMI around the standards of the service, that's really positive as well. I was just making sure that we get the positive message over, and that is that the front line in terms of the number of fire stations, we hear the news, other fire authorities are having major problems, but we're keeping the fire stations, we're keeping the manning levels, and I think under those circumstances, without being unkind to the rest of the organisation, it is important that we actually do fire out that message to the public and to our own colleagues that this is actually a much better position than we were in even 12 months ago.
Councillor Riddle.
Yeah, thank you very much, and congratulations on the report, and also finding the money to fill the deficit. I see that you found exactly the right amount of money to fill the deficit, which then begs a question, and my challenge to you today is to keep looking for efficiencies throughout the rest of the year, because you don't know where they're going to be or when the opportunities might arise. So well done on getting us here, but keep on looking for those efficiencies, because that actually then future-proofs the front line, as Paul has mentioned already. So my challenge is to keep on the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. No, and I do agree. We have got about £20,000 of kind of unidentified in that walk, so I didn't quite find it all. But I absolutely agree. We need to keep looking and making sure, and the resilience piece is, if we can over-deliver and we can have a slight surplus, we top that up into our reserves and use it for future needs. So yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to move us on to the vote then. As the recommendations in the report, Fire Authority is asked to approve the updated balanced revenue budget position for 2026-27 presented in Appendix 1 and note the current expected budget position based on the latest available information assumptions detailed in sections 4 and 5 of the paper. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Sood. Seconder? Stansfield. Mix it up. Can I take all votes against? Abstentions? And then votes for. Marvellous. Back to you, Verity, for the reserve strategy, item 16.
Thank you. So this one starts on page 83, I think it is, of your pack. So this is something that we bring to the Fire Authority every year. So I'm presenting to you today an updated reserve strategy for the period 2026 to 2030. It is primarily based on the previously approved reserve strategy, so there aren't significant changes, but we do reflect some of the movements in the updated position and where we think reserves currently are. There are two appendices to this paper. The first is a reserve strategy, and then the second is a summary of reserves with some of the numbers included. So if I move on to the reserve strategy, so that is included at Appendix 1, and it's really here to kind of demonstrate to you what we use reserves for, and for you to consider their relevancy and how adequate they are. And I'll only pick out a couple of bits in this strategy, but the first is just the fact that there is no statutory minimum or maximum level of reserves that a fire authority has to hold. So we're not told a level of reserves we have to hold. It is down to our discretion and my discretion in my role to make sure that we think our reserves are set at a realistic level. There are multiple reasons that we hold reserves, but generally they are to help with financial resilience, so the health and the resilience of the service. So we would hold a reserve, either building them up so that we can use them for some known future requirement. We have a working balance reserve, which we are required to hold, but the level is at our discretion to kind of fund uneven cash flows, but we are always required to top that up. They could be for future investments needs or contingency reserves, so we hold them therefore if we have, and our legal fees reserve is a good example of that, so we hold a legal fees reserve in case we have significant legal costs that are over and above what we would generally forecast to spend. The other bit I just wanted to pick up in the reserve strategy is on page 95. It's about halfway down, and it talks about that general reserve working balance. So we set that reserve at £1.5 million. It represents just over 2.2% of our revenue budget. This reserve has remained unchanged for some time, so therefore the percentage of the revenue budget that it represents is reducing. So in the prior year, it was around 2.5% of the revenue budget. So this paragraph really just outlines the fact that we haven't increased this reserve. And we are mindful of the fact that it's representing a lower proportion of our overall revenue budget, so therefore offering less resilience. However, we haven't used this reserve in recent years, so we've kind of had to offset the fact that we don't have sufficient reserves to top it up. But it will remain under review, because we're acknowledging there that in an ideal world we'll be increasing that reserve to help it represent a higher proportion of our revenue budget to help increase our resilience. If I move on to the kind of detailed reserves position, I won't talk through. There's a section in the main paper, section 4, the financial implications, talks through the detail of each of the movements on reserves. I won't talk through that in detail, but it's really just to highlight that the reserves, we utilise some of the reserves during the year, we top some of them up during the year if we can, and then there's a review that happens annually with the Service Leadership Board, where we look at whether we want to reallocate any reserves around, so any transfers between reserves, to make sure that we think the reserves are in the right place to address our risks and needs at the time. So all of that is represented in Appendix 2. And again, I won't talk through them in detail, but the general picture here we can see is that our reserves are reducing. So we can see the unaudited balance as at the end of March 2026 is what is reflected in our draft account. So they're out for public inspection at the moment. That is subject to change depending on the audit outcomes, but that is the current expected level of reserves for the year ended March 2026. You can see there right at the bottom, the £1.5 million of capital reserve that I referenced is still there to be used for 26-27. Just above that is the £1.5 million working balance, which has been unused. There's a PFI equalisation fund. That isn't really an accessible reserve. That is linked to the PFI contract and just reduces as the contract runs out. So it's not cash that we can use for anything in particular. The reserves above that, so the cash-backed earmark reserves, are the ones that we have more discretion over in terms of reallocating and making sure that we put those reserves where we think the highest need is. Really, to highlight, we've got just over 3 million at the end of March, but this projection for the following 4 years takes that to under £1 million. So quite a significant reduction. We have got reserves specifically in place for specific projects. Once they are used, we are mainly just holding contingency reserves after that. And because of the way the medium-term financial plan is at the moment with deficits, we have not got sufficient revenue budget surpluses to then top these back up. So it's really kind of the message is we've got reserves, and we think we've got some reserves to help support us with some of our key projects over the next year or two, but we're not foreseeing ourselves being in a position at this time to top them up and help us with any future investment plans. So it's kind of linked to the previous paper in that there are challenges there for us still in terms of our revenue funding, and linking back to the Chief's comments around kind of still looking at every opportunity we can to boost our revenue funding to help us boost our resilience. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Verity, for your report. Looking at the spreadsheet on page 97, Appendix 2, can I clarify the items that have a blue background? Do they have a blue background because they are 1 year or ending reserves that are going to run out next year or be spent this year?
I should have clarified that, actually. The blue background reflects the fact that they are restricted. They have restricted use. So it's money that we've been given that has to be used for a specific purpose. So
within a time frame?
I don't know if there's been timeframes on them. Right. But interestingly, so the ESMCP reserve was a previous amount of money that we were given for that project. The project was delayed, and in the end, all of that money was collected back, and the project's now being re-kicked off again. So the reason that reserve has been utilised is because we gave the money back to start, so that money's all been collected back in to start the project off again, and it's being funded in a slightly different way, as I understand it, in future. So that was given back. And then the other reserve, the Technical Fire Safety Reserve, is linked to something I said in the previous paper around the reserves we use to balance the budget around business fire safety. So that money is given to us specifically for technical fire safety work. So work that Area Manager Steve Quinton oversees, and he keeps a very close eye on what's in that reserve, what he can use it for, and we do quarterly submissions to confirm what we've spent, to then keep track of what we can and can't allocate and use that reserve to fund. If that helps.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, we'll move on to the recommendations. So the Fire Authority has to approve the 2026-2030 Reserve Strategy, Appendix 1, and the Summary of Reserves presented at Appendix 2, which includes transfers between reserves proposed as part of the year-end review completed by the Service Leadership Board, and also agree for the approved 2026-2030 Reserve Strategy to be published on the website. Do I have a proposer? Councillor May, seconder. I'll go to Councillor Wilcox. Can I take all votes against? Abstentions? Votes for? That's approved. So now it's item 17, amendment to the terms of reference for local pension board. Back to Zoe.
Thank you. So, yes, page 99 of your pack, and this is a further application essentially for approval to amend the Constitution. So this is an amendment to allow for the appointment of a vice chair for the local pension board to be elected from the board's voting members. So currently the terms of reference provide for a board that comprises of 2 employer representatives and 2 scheme member representatives with an independent chair. The terms of reference do not currently provide for a vice chair. So whilst the independent chair arrangements remain appropriate, the absence of a named deputy does create some fragility if the chair is unavailable, whether that's on a planned or unplanned basis. So the amendment is sought not because of any criticism of the chair, but to mitigate an avoidable governance risk. So having a vice chair would indeed improve resilience and continuity by ensuring that meetings can proceed with clear leadership in the absence of the chair. So the proposal is consistent with the governance arrangements that are adopted elsewhere within the sector. Paragraphs 5.2 and 5.3 of the paper set out the proposed wording that would be included within the terms of reference for the Local Pensions Board in the Constitution, and the amendment does not alter the statutory responsibility of this authority as the scheme manager. So the authority is asked to approve the amendment to allow for a vice chair for the Local Pensions Board.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Hardy.
Yeah, will the vice chair then require further training? Because most of the pension board have had training. Does the vice chair require further training, or or not?
It's not formally required, but there is training available through South West Councils in terms of chairing and vice chairing meetings.
Councillor Payne.
Yeah, I've got no problem with having a vice chair for the board, but it does strike me that there isn't really that much of a risk if the chair doesn't turn up for some reason. Then the meeting can just elect a chair for that particular meeting. I think that the risk is greater that the board will be out without the professional advice that the independent chair gives. I think that's more of a risk really than if he doesn't turn up.
At the moment, the way that the Constitution is worded, that to be quorum, that requires 3 members plus the independent chair. So if the independent chair is not there, the meeting cannot go ahead. It can't elect a chair from members who are present. So this is essentially so that if that instance arises that the independent chair is not available for whatever reason, that it doesn't delay the meeting. Obviously the work of the Local Pensions Board is particularly important when considering all of our pensions arrangements.
Councillor May.
Chair, thank you. I'm a bit nervous about the qualifications issue because I think the point was well made. If you unfortunately have to have a vice chair in, that vice chair surely has to be qualified. And I would rather we could put some wording in there saying about they must get that qualification, because it is quite an onerous task to take on. And I think it would be sensible for us to be actually saying that anybody who is prepared to stand as the vice chair should actually get the proper training to do that role properly.
Thank you. And I would support Paul on that. And I think it's also a good thing, because if you're going to chair a meeting, it's good to be going into a meeting already knowing you're going to be chairing that meeting, rather than being voted in during the meeting. You'd probably be better prepared to take the meeting if you know you're going in as the chair of that meeting. So I'm supportive of this. Thank you.
Is there some proposed wording you'd like to add to the recommendation? Councillor Kent.
Right, can I just check? Is my understanding that the vice chair would come from the current members of this pension committee, so they are all trained? So I'm just wondering, because I'm a bit confused, Paul, what additional knowledge do you think they need? Because obviously they're not qualified pension experts, but they have been trained up to sit on the committee. I see the point you've made, the risk that if the chair is missing, but one presumes this is just being put in place in case of hopefully unique circumstances. And it's been pointed out just the way the Constitution is written that we couldn't actually go ahead if the chair is unavailable. So I just wanted clarification, that was all, on what additional qualifications you felt they needed.
I think I was responding to the clerk's comment about an independent chair role, and if you're a member of the board and you then the chair doesn't turn up, then that's not quite the independent chair that I think was being referred to. Maybe I've misunderstood the debate.
Councillor Moss.
I think we're confusing two things here, aren't we? There's if the chair can't turn up for a meeting, you need to something functionally in place to make sure that meeting takes place. If the chair, for whatever reason, not available for 3 or 6 months, and there's all that background stuff, then you need someone with a considerable degree of qualification in order to do that, which would be unfair on a elected member who was doing that. Because I'm not sure what the level of qualification is. I think there's a big difference between a 1-hour course and a 3-hour degree, a 3-year degree.
As you say, it's an amendment to ensure that the meeting can go ahead, that this proposal is seeking to address. In terms of the levels of training, arguably, if the independent chair were to be unavailable for a period of over a longer term, then that may be something that would be returned to either PRC and or this authority for consideration as to the position for the LPB then going forward in that position. But this is just to ensure that then meetings can go ahead, so we know how important they are. And of course, if there are any issues in terms of items on the agenda for the meeting that those in the committee on the board don't feel comfortable to proceed on that occasions in the absence of an independent chair, they can of course then be adjourned to a future meeting date.
With that caveat, can I suggest we vote on the recommendation as it's written, but with the caveat that we make sure that training needs and the relevant expertise is available?
Chair, can I just propose then, including appropriate training, and then somewhere in the text, I would then feel happier.
So, approve the proposed amendment to the Avon Fire Authority Constitution terms reference to the local pension board to provide the appointment of an appropriately trained vice chair. Will that sort it? Right. Okay. Yep. Councillor Hardy.
Just make some level of it. I think it should probably read a vice chair with the appropriate training provided if required.
So it would be approve the proposed amendment to the Avon Fire Authority Constitution terms reference to the local pension board to provide the appointment of a vice chair with the appropriate training if required.
Kind of sorry I started this now.
From among the board's voting members, with the vice chair to retain the rights and responsibilities of their appointment to the board, including the right to vote. Do I have a proposer for that revised wording? Councillor May. Seconder.
You mentioned the financial implication. You said no significant resource implications. What does it mean that? Is that zero, or maybe some cost will be there?
There would be no additional.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
depending on the appropriate training they might need. All right, so Councillor May is proposing the revised wording. Is there a seconder for the revised wording? Councillor Riddle. Can I take all votes against? Abstentions? All votes for? Marvellous. We got there in the end. Right, let's move on to item 18, which is member information for 2025-26. To pass back to the clerk.
Thank you. So paper 18 starts at page 103 of your papers. So this report is for scrutiny. It's the purpose of it is to provide details of the member allowances and expenses that were paid during the 25-26 municipal year. And the authority, as I say, is asked to note the content of the paper. And then there is an element of approval, which is approving the publication of the figures at Appendix 1 on the authority's website. The publication of the figures, along with the record of the members' attendance at meetings during that 25-26 municipal year, is automatically recorded. The attendance is automatically recorded on the website as a feature of the modern.gov system that we use. And then the publication of all of that information will provide for robust and transparent governance. Being open and transparent about the activities of members encourages public scrutiny and accountability. It also ensures compliance with the local authority's member allowances England regulations of 2003. On that basis, the authority is asked to note the paper and approve the publication of those expenses. Thank you.
Any questions on this one? Okay. Do we need to formally vote for the approval?
Yeah, for that bit,
so,
please.
can I have a proposer? Councillor Connolly, seconder? Councillor Townsend? So I take all votes against, abstentions, votes for. Marvellous. Okay. Item 19, 2025-26 revenue budget position, final outturn. Verity.
Thank you. So this paper starts on page 107 of your bundle. So we're now backward looking. So we're looking back at the previous financial year, so 25-26, and the final revenue budget position. This paper follows a similar format to those papers that are presented to the Policy and Resources Committee throughout the year. So some members of that committee might recognise the flow of this paper. So if I move on, I'll move on to the key consideration section. So section 5, and just pick up some of the key movements really in the revenue budget outturn compared in the revenue budget compared to the revenue outturn compared to the budget position that was set. So the first is really around income. So we have had some over recovery of central government income, and a lot of that is to do with the receipt of some additional funding from MHCLG. The way that this funding has worked, we've held some in reserves and then we've used some during the year. So we put about £1.7 million through the revenue budget, and that is then used to contribute to the capital programme, and then an element of it is used to offset some of the revenue costs associated with the Bath station rebuild as well. That's offset by a couple of under recoveries in income around business rates compensation and rates reconciliation figures, which is where the budget was set without having known final outcomes of those. So they came in slightly lower than expected. And paragraph 5.2 just talks a little bit about some over recoveries, and one of those is investment income that we talked about previously. So we have had previous over recoveries on investment income because of higher than predicted interest rates and cash balances, so something again that we can continue to monitor for 26-27. In terms of costs and variances against the budget, if we move down to the bottom of page 108, paragraph 5.7 and 5.8, there has been an overspend on premises and transport costs, but a lot of this is to do with accounting treatment for some of the costs associated with the Bath rebuild. So the Bath project costs assumed some costs associated with the setup of a temporary site. Those costs are not allowed to be treated as capital under accounting rules, because they are being used to run a site that delivers business as usual, which doesn't qualify as a capital spend. So what we've done is reallocated those costs into the revenue budget and utilised the MHCLG fund to offset that, funding to offset that, so that we didn't see a detrimental impact. So there's some costs there going through rents and rates for the Bath temporary station, and there's also some of those costs going through property as well. And the total of those costs is around £600,000. So around £600,000 of the 3 million has been used to offset those costs in the year. We have also seen a bit of an overspend due to additional security, station security around the service area. So that was some money that was spent towards the end of the year to increase security on stations. We have been able to partially mitigate some of these overspends with an underspend on utilities. And I think I mentioned this previously in one of the papers. We had over-accrued the 24-25 costs, so we released that accrual, so it creates a credit in 25-26. So it's not about the current year costs, it's just tidying up prior year. There's been a little bit of an overspend in vehicle maintenance as well. Lots of things contributing to that, but elements of fuel, maintenance costs, but we have seen an underspend in car allowances, so it's been slightly offset there. If we move on to supplies and services, we've seen quite a big underspend. The majority of that can be linked to IT costs. One big reason is to do with the delays in the mobilisation system. So some of the implementation, we assumed a certain number of milestones would be paid during 25-26, and one of those milestones has slipped into 26-27. So part of that underspend is attributable to that. And a lot of the rest of the underspend is just thanks to our head of IT, who's done a lot of work in kind of consolidating our IT arrangements, making sure that we're only paying for things that we actually have, and improving the procurement and kind of contract management we have around some of our IT contracts. We have seen a bit of an overspend in terms of occupational health, so we've got an additional contract in place on a temporary basis for improved healthcare options for our employees. That's for a 2-year period, so there's been a little bit of an overspend there, which is outlined in paragraph 5.13. If I move on to the bottom of page 109 and other costs, this is where we have things like reserve transfers, capital financing costs, and where we thought we had to make where we had identified savings challenges during the year. So there looks like quite big variances here, but it's where part of it is where we've released. So we identified a £505,000 saving requirement. That's been released, and those savings have then been realised further up in other lines of the budget. We also had quite a big variance on the reserve transfer, so we assumed we were going to release 1.4 million of reserves, and actually what we've done is we've been able to contribute to reserves to the tune of about £70,000. A lot of that is to do with the MHCLG grant funding, because we didn't have that in the budget to start with. So any money that we didn't spend on, any money that went through the revenue budget that didn't go onto the temporary bus costs has gone through and contributed to reserve. So that's I can reconcile them if you need me to the detail, but that's a big reason that we've had a variance on reserves there. The other final line I just wanted to mention is the stock write-off. Right at the bottom, we had a credit of about £365,000. It's not a stock write-off. What it is we had previously only accounted for certain elements in our stock number. We did a bit of work this year to increase that and include things within our fleet maintenance, so things like fuel and some of the parts that we have in our fleet stores. So it's increased our stock number. So if we look at the balance sheet in the next paper, you'll see that the stock number's gone up. And what that does is create a benefit. It's just a one-off benefit in the year where we're getting the accounting and treatment aligned. So there's a benefit there at the bottom. And that was all I was going to say, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Verity. Any questions? Councillor May, and then come to you after.
Can I ask a governance question? You're the Section 151 officer. Do you liaise with the Section 151 officers of the local authorities as well? So would they have seen these papers?
I don't liaise directly with them on these papers. Occasionally I have contact with them, but generally for other things, not necessarily for these. So they're available publicly, but I don't.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because of the precept, whether there's any scrutiny that comes from our local authorities, that was all.
Not directly, no.
In effect, what we're here to do. Councillor Sani.
Thank you. Thanks. So, just a question on the Bath Station rebuild grant. The MHCLG grant is large, like 1.704 million, and carried forward. So, is the remaining Bath Station grant fully protected in reserves? And is any part at risk due to a capital program slippage?
So what we've done, we've got about £1 million of that grant left that we haven't spent. So during 25-26, we've allocated about 1.3 million to the actual capital spend, and we'll see that in the next paper. We've put £600,000 towards the revenue Bath spend, which has gone through this, and therefore we've got just over £1 million left. That £1 million is in reserves. And that £1 million is planned to be used during 26-27, and it will be used to offset the temporary station site costs that have to go through the revenue budget, because we didn't plan for them to go through the revenue budget to start with. They were in the capital programme, if that makes sense. So they are there, and they will be used next year. And there's not a risk that any of that funding will go away. That will be used for that purpose. There's still a risk that, you know, overall costs could go up, but we've got quite good controls in place to hopefully mitigate that.
Any further questions? Okay. This report is just for noting, so we're asked to review the final outturn spending position against the 2025-26 revenue budget shown in Appendix 1, which we've done. So I'll now pass back to Verity to go through the 2025-26 capital programme final outturn position.
Thank you. So again, this is backward looking. We're looking back at 25-26, and this time the capital programme rather than the revenue position. There are 3 recommendations in this paper. There is an approval in there, and I'll talk you through what I've done, but I've slightly updated the capital programme for the 3 years, so this current financial year and the following 2, just because of the final 25-26 outturn. So if I move on to just talk about really how the 25-26 financial year ended up. So we have seen quite significant underspends against our capital programme and against the amounts that we initially expected to spend during this financial year. A lot of those are reprofiling of spends rather than underspends where the money is not going to be spent. So it's all about just shifting into later years. So when we set the 26-27 capital programme, we predicted an element of underspend on 25-26 and assumed that would come through into the 26-27 programme. And then what we've done as part of this paper is just kind of balance that off and look at the difference between what we expected to be shifted forward and what has actually shifted forwards to make sure that the 26-27 programme reflects everything that is needed in future to be spent. We have seen... Again, this links to all the papers we've seen previously. So we've seen a delay in our capital programme, which means that we have been able to delay our borrowing. So when we look at the way that this funding is, the way this capital programme has been funded, and that can be seen in Appendix 1 on page 119. If we look at the top section of the table, the actual expenditure is allocating the funding. We have used about 1.8 million of reserves. We had a capital receipt of about 250,000, which has been used to reinvest, and then the MHCLG transformational grant funding, 1.2, just under 1.3 million, has also been used to fund the capital programme. So it has left us about 1.5 million within capital reserves for future spend, and what it's also done is reduce the amount that we have available in future, obviously from the MHCLG grant, but it's meant that we have not had to borrow during 25-26. In terms of variances and kind of actual spends for the year, premises is obviously our largest element of the programme. We've spent around 2.7 million this year. As I've said, around 1.3 million of that was Bath and has been funded using the MHCLG transformational grant. The other element of spend, around 1.3 million of spend in the premises area, has been mainly across on-call station refurbishments that have happened during the year and a few other miscellaneous projects. And it does include the final, it's the final payment on the Bedminster project, which was done in the majority in the previous financial year. So there has been quite a big shift of spend into future years in terms of the premises project, and that is mainly due to the Bath redevelopment, and also a small element of capital spend was allocated to the Western project, and that's been moved out into future years as well. In terms of fleet's our kind of second largest area of capital spend, and we've spent just under £400,000. Around £300,000 of that was on our major rescue tender, and then around £75,000 on kind of smaller vehicle purchases. There has again been quite a shift and delay of spend, with this mainly being down to delays in the purchases of Type B appliances and some Swift Water vehicles. The completion of the major rescue tender was expected to happen during this year, and that's been shifted into early 26-27, along with the purchase of the vehicle for the new hovercraft. So both of those, well, all of those costs have been shifted into 26-27. So if I move on to just talking about, if I move on to paragraph 5.10 and just talking about, so what's being asked of the authority today in terms of reapproval. So the 26-27 three-year capital programme was presented in March based on an assumed level of 25-26 outturn. We assumed that we were going to spend just under £5.5 million at that point in time. What we've actually spent is just under £3.4 million. So there's been an additional £2 million of underspend, and we've had a little look at whether all of that should be rephased or not. And what we've done is rephased 1.4 million of that underspend into future years. So what we've done, and you can see in Appendix 2, the first column there is a 25-26 adjustment to actual. So there's just under 1.4 million of further delays that happened between when the budget was set and now, and the outturn, that we are now reflecting and adding into the future three-year programme. It doesn't change anything in terms of additional borrowing. We're not increasing the overall programme, it's just to do with years and transferring costs between years. So it's not increasing the borrowing requirement or anything like that, it's just shifting between years to reflect that delay. So that is presented in Appendix 2 for approval, and then what we will be able to do is report to Policy and Resources Committee against that revised profile. And the final element of this paper is just around the balance sheet. So something that we're required to do to be in line with SIP for best practice is to present you with a summary balance sheet. So there's a summary balance sheet for you in Appendix 3. This is based on the draft unaudited March 26 accounts. And there is some commentary in there to kind of explain any key movements. But you can see there in the inventories line, they've gone up from just over £300,000 to nearer £700,000, and that reflects the additional items we have included as stock items, so things like fuel and fleet parts, which was reflected in the revenue budget paper earlier as well. And that was all I was going to say, but happy to take any questions.
Well, go to Councillor Moss first because his hand shot up while you were speaking, and then I'll come to Councillor Hooker.
Shut up a bit at the point where you're looking at paragraph 5.11.
Yeah.
And I think it's the idea that I've got a question about the slippage in capital programme, and the borrowing requirement clearly has a saving when it comes to that borrowing requirement, but is particularly related to inflation in building costs. Is there a risk in future that the slippage will actually mean additional costs, particularly relating, and I'm thinking of the Bath fire station and where that is. So I suppose I would prefer to see a balance element within recognising that delaying borrowing might make you savings in the short term, but there is a potential bite in the longer term with building inflation.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I know that the premises team are still working on mitigating as much of the increase in cost that they've seen. So they're looking at speaking with the water companies and things like that for some of those increases that we saw in that project. And I know there is an element of contingency within that, which should help absorb some if there was risk. But I'm not sure how the contract was written. I don't know if Amber knows any more detail than me, but the protection that we put in there, because I know we were trying to get some protection in there around the risks and the cost increase as well, but I'm not certain of the wording that ended up in there. But absolutely take your point that there is a risk that those costs go up, and we've even seen that potentially with the Western project. As we focused on the Bath project, that Western project hasn't happened yet. We will need to reassess what the costs of that look like when we come to revisit it.
I think our Bristol colleagues will tell you about the contractor who is responsible for the Bath rebuild. Gave a world of pain to Bristol when it came to the big rebuild down the centre, wasn't it?
Councillor Hooker.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Verity, for the presentation. I've just got a minor point to make, or a minor suggestion, and that's on the balance sheet. It's obviously an extract rather than a full balance sheet. I just wonder if it might be worth completing it by adding in the unusable reserves so that it balances, but I'll just leave that thought with you. Thanks.
No, thank you. We'll take that into consideration. Thank you.
Councillor?
Thank you, Verity. Again, just clarification for the long-term borrowing. For the last 2 years, nothing significant has not changed. But is there something you're looking for, or will be balance sheet will be okay for this year, ending 31st of 27?
So for the year ended March 27, we will very likely need to increase our long-term borrowing in order to fund the capital programme. So if you looked at the capital programme in Appendix 2, we've only got around 1.5 million of reserves left, and we're spending around 19 million. So that would suggest that we need to borrow over 17 million to be able to fund that. We will look to borrow gradually, so we wouldn't necessarily take all of that off in one go. We'll look at what the cash flows look like. We'll try to utilise internal cash as much as possible. We set prudential indicators as well as part of that treasury management strategy, so any borrowing that we take on will need to comply with those indicators to ensure that it's affordable, sustainable, and prudent to do so. So we will do our best. I've also been looking at alternatives to Public Works Loan Board. So if we could borrow from another local authority, one of our unitary authorities, potentially just for a short period of time, and hope that then we can lock in lower rates with Public Works Loan Board in a year or two's time, potentially when those elevated rates have come down. But it's all a bit of a... there are lots of assumptions in there, but we will be taking on more borrowing over and above that 7 million that we currently hold.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. There's two recommendations that are review, and then there's a vote. So, Firefighting is asked to review the 2025-26 final position shown in Appendix 1 to consider the key issues and the updates provided. We're also asked to review the summary balance sheet, which was certainly done, presented in Appendix 3, and consider the commentary within the appendix provided in paragraphs 5.12 to 5.14. And then finally, we're asked to approve the revised 2026-27 to 2028-29 capital programme based on the final 2025-26 capital spend position shown in Appendix 2. Do I have a proposal? Councillor Connolly, seconder? Councillor Suda. All votes against? Abstentions? Votes for? Marvellous. And then last of your items, the item 21, Treasury Management Strategy Review for the year ending March 2026.
Thank you. Yes, so last paper. I will keep this one brief. So as required by firstly the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accounting, they issue a Treasury Management Code, and as part of that code, we are required to set a Treasury Management Strategy, review it at the half year, and then review it again at the year end. So this paper is bringing to you the full year review of our Treasury Management activities for 25-26 to be in line with that SIPFA requirement. There is quite a lot of information in this paper. Our Treasury Management advisors have helped us with the formatting to make sure that we include everything that we should include to be in line with those SIPFA requirements. And what I'm going to do is just pick out really the very key points, because actually our Treasury Management activity has been low during the year. So paragraph 5.7 on page 129 just confirms that we have operated within our Treasury limits and prudential indicators that we initially set out in our Treasury Management strategy for 25-26. Those are presented in Appendix 1 for information. We are able to reapprove those at any point during the year if we think we're going to breach them, but because of the delays in capital borrowing, or the capital programme and therefore borrowing, we've been nowhere near breaching them, and actually we've been quite significantly under. So no reapprovals, but just to confirm that we've operated within those limits through the year. Paragraph 5.8 confirms that no borrowing has been taken out during 25-26. Again, we've talked a lot about that because it has lots of implications across the whole of our finances, but we still do just hold the £7 million, which is 2 existing Public Works Loan Board loans. There's a paragraph on page 130 that just confirms that no external loan rescheduling was done during the year, so we haven't done anything to amend any of our existing loans either during the year. And paragraph 5.16 just confirms our cash balances, and this is to do with our investment activity. So we had just over £7 million of cash in our bank at the end of March. We do not hold any individual investments with separate counterparties. We have an arrangement in place with Bristol City Council where they manage our bank account balances for us, and they manage it as part of a pool of accounts with their own accounts as well, and we receive a return on those investments of SONIA, which is Sterling Overnight Index Average, less 0.25%. And there's a table at the bottom of page 131, and moving on to page 132, which just confirms the interest rates that we received each quarter, and then the £365,000 of investment income that we generated during the year as a result of that arrangement. So in summary, which is on page 132, there's 2 paragraphs there, but really it's just that none of the prudential indicators have been breached. There's been no new borrowing. We had a receipt of £3 million from MHCLG, which has helped to contribute to this. So we've managed to save money in terms of borrowing costs by delaying that borrowing, and we've actually generated a little bit of additional surplus cash as a result of higher returns on the invested cash we hold with Bristol City Council. So that's just a summary of our treasury management activities for the year, but happy to take any questions.
Councillor Johnson, and then I'll one more around the room.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just for my understanding, is this level of borrowing comparatively commonplace with other fire authorities?
It is hard to compare authority to authority because every authority is quite different in terms of size and scope and how they're made up, but borrowing isn't unusual, and we, at least for the last 10 years, haven't had any specific capital funding in the sector. So we cannot borrow money to fund our revenue day-to-day activities, but we are allowed to borrow for capital purposes. And because revenue funding has been so constrained for lots of services, they either haven't invested in their premises, which is seen, especially we can see it in some of our premises, we don't have the right facilities, and the need is becoming greater now because of that. Or they have to invest, but the only way they can fund it is through borrowing. So it's absolutely not unusual for services to hold borrowing. It's difficult to compare the levels, and I think our levels of borrowing are relatively low, but they are going to be increasing quite significantly over the next few years. So we might be on the higher end over the coming forecast.
Councillor Moss.
Thank you for this report, Verity. As you say, it's relatively calm waters in previous years, but moving into slightly choppier ones. Is there likely to be, or could I ask for a report on looking at 5.5 on the Public Works Loan Board strategy coming to policy and resources in the year? The reason I ask is that our borrowing requirement is going to be rising, and it's going to be rising very close to our prudential limits. Our strategy at the moment, I think that's the right way of putting it, is to go for shorter term public works loan boards because lower interest and then renegotiate. But could we have a discussion about what the future projections are for interest rates over the 5 to 10 years, because that changes the way you look at how long you take out the public work loan board length to allow you a degree of confidence.
Absolutely.
Sustainability.
Yeah, no, and we bring so Policy and Resources Committee receive an update on capital every quarter, and as part of that paper we do look at treasury management indicators, so we can bring some additional information around forecast interest rates, and I get forecast interest rates every day from PWLB, but I can ask our treasury management advisors to assist in kind of how we formulate that. We have got a Policy and Resource Committee meeting at the end of July, but I'm not sure I will be able, I'm not at that meeting, so I'm just not sure I'll be able to bring an update then, but I will bring it to I think it's October is the meeting after that. But it's absolutely something we'll make sure that we bring to you, because it is becoming, it's a imminent pressure.
Seriously, it's the middle towards the end of the year, I think would be useful. Thank you.
No, I think I saw Councillor Hooker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much, Verity, for the report. In terms of investments, I think that the returns look reasonably good, and certainly I understand that that security would be prioritised over yield. But I'd be right in thinking that the council actually sweep up all the available cash every day and then place that on deposit, so there isn't anything left which is non-interest bearing, and we maximise returns in that way.
That's my understanding, yes, but they do have it accessible. So if for any reason we wanted our cash now, we can access it. But they do have arrangements where they sweep the accounts every day, put lots in overnight investments, and then it comes back again the next morning, yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm going to which goes on that item. So we were asked to review the performance in relation to treasury management activities of the authority for 2025-26, including the fourth quarter set out in this report. Which just leave us with item 22 to confirm date of the next meeting is Thursday, 22nd of October 2026 at 10:30, and the venue will be Severn Park Training Centre. Thank you, everyone.